everyone, Doc T here with another episode of the Horses Advocate podcast. I'm doing this a little bit differently this time, mainly because I'm on the road so much this month. Right now I'm sitting in beautiful New Hampshire with some autumn leaves just trying to burst into color. It's going to happen any minute now. It's kind of rusty and orangey, but I see some bright reds coming through. And pretty soon these hills are going to be on fire with color. It's going to be so cool. What's interesting is right up the road here is Dartmouth College. And it's a very near and dear place to me because this is where my father went to college. And also his father, my grandfather, went to college. And also my great uncle, or maybe it's my great great uncle, I'm not sure. But Dr. Tucker was president of Dartmouth College. So there's a whole lot of Dartmouth here, except this Doc T, who never made it to Dartmouth. He ended up going to, instead of a green school, a red school called Cornell. Anyway, so it's nice to be sitting here. I come here every once in a while. I've got some horses in the neighboring state that I want to take care of. And it also brought me to another idea that I want to convey to all of you. You know that I'm big on nutrition. I talk a lot about nutrition, but today I'm going to talk about floating teeth from a unique perspective. And that perspective is in the sheer numbers of horses that I've worked on. And when I went back to 1983, and I kind of guesstimated how many horses I'd done from 83 to 97, I didn't have any accurate records. But then I started taking accurate records in 1998, which of course is 23 years ago. And I've been keeping count ever since. And I included all the students that I've helped, all the horses that I helped Melissa with when we first started, all the horses I used to check on. After every time she floated, she insisted that I check her horses to about 5,000 horses before I booted her out of the nest. And she's just about to come up on her 19,000th horse, which is just an incredible amount of horses that she's seen. But last week I did my 75,000th horse. And if that is a mouthful, just write down the number 75 and then a comma and then 3 zeros. That's how many horses I've actually floated or helped people float. And if I've stuck my hand in one of those, each horse at least once, and then double that because it's probably twice, that's a lot of mouths that I've felt. So I decided that I would dedicate this podcast as I sit here charging my car here in beautiful autumn weather of New Hampshire to reflect back on my career, to let you understand where my head comes from sometimes when it comes to floating teeth and dentistry. Because I sit so far outside the box, you can't even see me. When people say think outside the box, I was never included when it comes to floating horses' teeth or dental care in horses. I started back when all we had were hand floats. Succinylcholine was being used, but they just found this new drug called Rompum, and Rompum, or xylazine is the generic name. They started using that. There was no other drugs out there to help us with horses. And I used to carry a bottle of that with me everywhere I went. I used it quite a lot, to tell you the truth. So what have I learned in all these years of floating teeth since 1983, which is coming up, let's see, this is 2021. So that's 38 years I've been doing this. And now my profession has decided that there's a lot of dentistry that needs to be done. But they require all sorts of advanced techniques and theories. And it's kind of frustrating because I acknowledge that their concerns are there, but after they think about the concern, then I say, okay, now what? And like most physicians and veterinarians, they're compelled to do something, but sometimes that one thing isn't always the right thing. So I'm going to give you some examples, some stories, and some myths that I want to bust. The first myth I hear all the time, usually from veterinarians who don't like the idea that I'm floating teeth in their territory. You know, they think that they own the space within a certain number of miles around them, and that they should be doing everything. And now with the need to pay more bills, they end up tying things like floating teeth to the rest of healthcare. And I got to tell you, it's more of an art form. And this is the first thing I want to convey to you about dentistry. It's an art form. There's no set rule. In other words, when it comes to changing the oil in your car, whether you do it in your state or the state 2,000 miles away, or even in another country, that car has a manual because it's a machine. And everybody who will change the oil in your car will know exactly how to do it and how much new oil has to be put in. Of course, in my car, you don't need oil because I don't have a motor, but that's a whole different thing. And yeah, I'm a geek. This is my 4th year in this car, and I have 210,000 miles in it. So I'm wearing out the car and wearing out my float blades, but I'm pretty consistent. 210,000 miles in 4 years taking care of horses' teeth. And it's not including all the rental cars that I've rented to cover the whole state of Washington when I flew out there. But let's try and stay focused here, Doc. Sometimes this is going to be more of an eclectic group of messages all about dentistry that I'm going to send out. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. You won't tune it off and say, gosh, this is too winding a road. But what's my point? See, there I go. Teeth to me have become a part of my everyday life. I get to see horses all over the country. Today I saw 2 brand new horses, meaning new to me, I've never seen before, with an owner who's never seen me before, but on word of mouth had asked me to come by and take care of her horse's teeth. And like most people, they've had horror stories in the back of their horses being over sedated, falling down. They didn't like the horse being immobilized with a brace and a mouth jack put in their mouth. And they just don't like that. Horse people don't like that. Horse people want to have respect for their horse. And going back to the automobile changing oil, that's understandable. You put the car in one spot, you pull the plug, you let the oil drain out, and then you put the plug back in, I hope, and then you pour the oil back in and you've got your oil changed. And in dentistry, you have a living, breathing animal that has thoughts, feelings, and wants to be understood. And some stranger comes in, and they may not like strangers. They may not like the pain. The pain can be just a tickling sensation. It could be vibration, or it could be the sores that are on the cheeks from the ulcers, and they're in agony. Sometimes horses don't show any pain at all to people until you remove the points, and then I get a call the next day saying they never realized how much pain their horse was in until the cause of the pain was removed. And the horses are now going better on the bit, like willingly, not fighting anymore. Which now I've touched 2 subjects, so let me finish up this art form deal. If I put a rock right here, here's a rock, it's sitting right in front of us, and I picked it up off the ground, put it on a pedestal, put some lights on it, and I just swoon over this rock. I'm saying, oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful sculpture. It's just amazing. It moves me to tears just looking at this thing. It's priceless to me. And you're looking at it and say, Doc, it's just a rock. You just picked it up and put it there. And what I'm trying to convey to you is art is just an interpretation, whether it's a painting or music. I mean, you may like rap, or you may like classical music. And I like blues, believe it or not. So, it's all still music, and floating is floating teeth. But there are varieties of floating teeth out there where some people believe that just doing the upper front teeth is floating the teeth. They don't understand that the very last lower cheek teeth next to the tongue is causing just as much, if not more, problems. So in my practice, my thoughts about dental care is to remove all sources of pain so the jaw and the tongue can work properly. But there are some who just do partial floats and say, I floated the horse. There are also some that believe that it's bigger than it needs to be. They look at the temporal mandibular joints, for example, and they suggest that you need to balance the mouth. And if you don't balance the mouth, then you aren't going to get the horse in alignment throughout its body. And I can understand how some people think that because I know if one thing's out of whack, it affects the whole body. I get it. But unfortunately, in dentistry, it's all speculation. There's nobody coming out with, $100 million that says, okay, we're going to take this group of horses and we're going to take them from birth to death, and we're going to study just their teeth, and we're going to do all these scientific studies on dentistry. That just isn't going to happen ever because nobody's got that extra kind of cash to throw into dentistry because there's no return on the investment. So we're only left with anecdotal observational studies, and everyone in the science community wants analytical data. They want to see blind, placebo-controlled, large cohort studies. Just means, thousands of horses. And we're not going to get it, not in dentistry. It'll never happen. So this is what's so exciting about doing 75,000 horses. I can see the patterns that come along, and I can understand what I've done and where it goes and what we get out of that. And with just maybe, I don't know, believe it or not, you just, at least from what I know, I don't think I've had a dozen complaints on what I've done. That means there's 74,988 that seem pretty happy. So I think that's a pretty good sample size. And I do all kinds of horses, from minis to mini donks to draft horses with tons of warm bloods and tons of racing thoroughbreds in between. I've done horses that have won the Kentucky Derby. I've been inside their mouths. I've done horses that go to the Olympics. I've done horses that won huge events in their sport. Reining horses, barrel racing that we've been able to shave, thousandths of a second off, so they go from losing to winning. So there's a ton of anecdotal experience that tells me just one thing. It's all about removing the cause of pain. And once you get that pain gone, you have horses that are more willing to work with you. They comply better. It's the best way I can explain it. So why do the teeth get this way? Well, on my long list of questions to ask God when I die, that's right there at the top. Why did you make teeth that need floating? And we know that teeth don't grow. That's the biggest misconception of people who own horses. They think that they grow like fingernails, and they don't. But they do erupt out. It's like the lead inside a mechanical pencil. As you're writing, you just kind of click out more. And so as they chew and they wear down most of their tooth, they don't wear it completely off. They have a ridge of tooth that's left that continues to look longer, but in reality, the rest of the tooth is getting shorter. And then they replace it with tooth that's held in reserve in the skulls, in the bones. And then there's another thing called stropping. If you think of the word stop, S-T-O-P with an R, S-T-R-O-P, that's when Granddad used to take a straight razor to shave his face. And then he took his razor and on a lubricated leather strap, he'd rub it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to hone the edge into a razor sharp edge. And that's called stropping the razor. And you could actually buy and continue to buy stropping kits to sharpen these straight razors. So the the tongue moves along these ridges in an effort to clean the mouth. And as it does, it sharpens this edge to a razor's edge, especially the very last lower cheek teeth, which is right next to the base of the tongue that's being worn all the time. And then the first bottom cheek teeth that are worn down. probably the first tooth in the mouth, usually to go to end stage, which means they run out of tooth and then they are either stay at the gum line or they fall out. The incisors, by the way, are worn down by the tongue, and this uneven wear that you see of the incisors, instead of the incisors being straight across, sometimes they're curved so it looks like a smile, or curved the other way so it looks like a frown, or sometimes they're angled at a shear. My personal horse had a V shape. It was kind of unusual. I don't usually see a V shape. And you can see all of these at the Horse's Advocate, which I'm sure all of you want to get over there and take a look at. So I have a lot of images from dentistry there. But you want to take a look at the aging the horse's teeth by the front view, and you get to see all the different angles that horses have. And that's all from tongue wear. Nobody's ever convinced me otherwise. In fact, most horses have a relaxed space. In fact, if you just think for a moment where your teeth are, very few of you have your teeth clenched while listening to this. There's a space between them. Your jaw doesn't come together and stay there. It comes together for chewing. And the tongue is constantly moving in and out as you chew and organize the food into a bolus. And as the tongue moves back and forth, it will shorten the exposed tooth. This happens in two areas. One is the incisors. And if the horse is favoring one side and the tongue is constantly coming out, out the left side of the mouth and moving to the right and moves down an angle, those incisors will make a angled appearance after time. One of the proofs of this is when you see a parrot-mouthed horse. And this is where the front teeth, instead of coming together, the upper jaw is way over the lower jaw. They don't meet at all. So the incisors, the nipper teeth, they're not coming into wear at all. But these teeth are constantly erupting. So what prevents the lower teeth from over-erupting and going right into the palate of the horse? I mean, I've never seen it. It's never happened. Why isn't this happening? Well, that's because the tongue is constantly going out and in with every movement of harvesting grass. With every time the horse goes down, they stick their tongue out, they lick the grass up, and they snap it off with their head between their upper incisors and their tongue. Rarely do they use both teeth to actually snap the grass off. If you think of all the ruminants out there, cattle, sheep, goats, deer, elk, bison, all the ruminants, they're born with no upper incisors. So the incisors really aren't important for harvesting grass, as you can tell from all these very fat, parrot-mouthed horses. Their incisors don't even come together, yet they're out there harvesting grass, no problem. And that's because the tongue helps them harvest the grass. So that's one of the things that people talk about. They think horses' teeth grow. They don't. They erupt throughout life, and there is an end stage where there's no more tooth coming out. Sometimes people think that aligning the jaw is important by cutting the incisors, and I just disagree with that, because no one has ever done a study where they make some sort of base of what the horse is doing. So in other words, is the horse chewing well or not chewing well? Is there a problem that only cutting the incisors seems to solve? Because everyone who files down the incisors also goes ahead and files down the rest of the teeth, and now they've got all the pain gone from the mouth. So I think it still boils down to pain. One example of pain in the horse happened years ago, where I got a call. It was in the evening, an emergency call about a horse who just cut its tongue. And it was literally 2/3 lacerated straight across the tongue from its right side almost all the way through to the left. So it was just hanging on by about 1/3, maybe a little less, of the tongue. And I went there because they said they've been calling all the vets, and then they got me, and I know the mouth pretty well. And I said to them, well, this is going to be an easy thing to solve. And what we're going to do, I know you're going to call me nuts, but we're going to float the teeth. And they looked at me and like, why are you doing that? I'm saying the tongue needs a comfortable place to lay. And if you can't get that, the horse is just going to bite it again. And the tongue heals beautifully if it's allowed to just sit there. And we put it on a liquid diet. And I came back a week later and the tongue was all but healed. I mean, it was just that fast. Within a week, that tongue just had a little dimple left. And I thought that was pretty incredible. But the horse was so happy. Those teeth, it's been rare that I've gotten teeth that sharp. They were just, take a brand new razor blade, just one of those single razor or surgical scalpel out. And that's how sharp these teeth were. And I didn't have to work hard just to give a place for the tongue to lay that's safe. And this is another thing with bits. People are against bits, but they don't understand the bit is a space occupying mass. And when you put it in the mouth and then you put a noseband over that, you're pushing the tongue, the tongue against the sharp points. So if you look at me and my face represents the tongue and my fingertips represent the sharp teeth, they're pressing in every time. But then when you put the space occupying mass in, called the bit, and then you put a noseband on, they're just really digging into the cheeks. And that's what's happening to these horses. So they're trying to put the tongue over the bit. They're trying to get the tongue in a safe spot and they have trouble. So they fight. They're constantly fighting the bit. And if you take care of all those sharp teeth in the back, the tongue has now a safe place to lay when the bit's in there. And now you have good connection with most horses. So this is an eclectic group of stories about teeth. I think one of the biggest complaints most dentists have against hand floaters, meaning those that believe in using the power tools, they say that we can't get the back teeth. And the reason for that is the teeth and the upper jaw don't lay in a straight line. So you look at a brick wall and it's usually straight, or the wall of your house is straight and it goes from front to back on a straight line. But in the horse's mouth, the upper jaw is pretty interesting. It goes starting from the first tooth all the way back to the sixth tooth, the last tooth. It curves out and then curves back in. So going from your lips straight back to the last tooth on the side, there's a big curve that occurs. And just halfway back, it starts to curve back into the head. And those teeth rise up. So when the float blade comes back, if it's going straight back on that tooth, it's going to miss that curve out and the curve in and the curve up. So you have to use what I call pitch, yaw, and roll, which is basically, if this is the float blade, and I know if you're not looking at me, you don't know, use the flat of your hand. If you've got your hand straight out, the palms facing straight down toward the ground, and your fingers are out straight, if you pitch your fingertips down toward the ground, so your palm is no longer parallel to the ground, that's called pitching down. And if you raise your fingertips up, that's called pitching up. And then if you twist at the wrist, so instead of going straight in front of you, it curves in a little bit at your wrist, that's yawing in. And then the same thing if you if you yaw your fingers to the outside. So you got pitch, which is up and down. You have yaw, which is left and right. And then you have roll, which is on that axis of your arm. You're rolling. And those are your three-dimensional axes that the float blade has to do to follow those teeth back to make sure that you get every tooth. One of the things that I do in my practice is I stick my hand in and I feel every tooth. And I feel for any sharp edges because my fingers do better than my eyes. Eyes on a very cold day, for example, I look in and I see a bunch of fog. Eyes, I can't see if I'm looking straight at you. And if you got your hair tied back in a ponytail, I can't see that. But I can reach around the back of your head with my hand and I can feel the ponytail and I can even feel what you've actually tied your hair back with. So my fingers can tell me a lot. And after 75,000 floats, my fingers can tell me a ton. So I make sure that all the points are gone. And we use about 26 different techniques to get the blade associated and get it in the right spot. And we've actually named those techniques for our school. And that helps teach people how to get the blade in the right spot and get all the nooks and crannies, all the little spots that are sharp. And then we feel them with a finger and we keep filing until they're smooth. So that's one of the other things, the myth that hand floaters can't get the back teeth. The only reason why a hand floater can't get the back teeth is because they don't care, but they can. And I've been in plenty of mouths that are done with sedation, the mouth jacked open, and the power tools, and they've missed the back teeth. In fact, one famous case, I was asked to take a look at a horse in Florida, and I said, well, there's three places: the first lower cheek teeth and the two last upper cheek teeth. And I got those three done, and that was on a Thursday morning. And on Sunday, they called me up and said they won the grand champion of the show, which is a lot of money down in Florida, like maybe 50 grand or something. And so they insisted that I start flying to the state of Washington to take care of their teeth. And from there, it just spawned out where the whole state of Washington was just in love with this type of dentistry because the veterinarians out there aren't willing. And that brings up another really interesting point. If in your business, you're good at what you do and everything's fine, but somebody comes along with a better idea that your clients like, you have a choice. You can say to your clients, your customers, well, I'm going to try and learn how to do that so I can offer it to you as well. Or they can just tear the other person down and say, oh, what they're doing is wrong. They can't do this. They can't do that. For instance, most veterinarians and even trainers will say, well, Dr. Tucker can't get the back teeth, yet nobody's actually gone in and felt them right after I've done or hung out with me to feel. If they did, they wouldn't say that anymore. But instead, it's just easier to tear somebody else down, which is just typical human behavior. Another thing they say is you have to visualize what's going in the mouth. If you don't visualize and actually identify all the things that are going on, you're not doing a competent job. For instance, they start talking about dental caries. Each tooth has these spots in them called pulp chambers that start to decay and get long. And long meaning if you stuck a probe down in it, the probe goes further and further down in as there's more and more decay. And they'll start to measure that and they'll say, oh my gosh, we're starting to get dental caries here. There's one guy back in, I think it was the year 2000, who's not a veterinarian, who proposed that you start filling these cavities with amalgam just like you do in humans. It was a disaster. The guy got discredited. I'm pretty sure he's in jail now because he's accused of all sorts of bad things all the way out to California. He left a string of bodies, if you will. And finally, the parent company, the American Association of Equine Practitioners, came out and said, filling caries with amalgam is just not working. So they don't do it. We don't even talk about it anymore. That's water under the bridge because horses' teeth are constantly erupting. But they do get concerned that these dental caries coalesce and they start to make a fracture by putting pressure inside the tooth that causes it to split apart. And I see these all the time. And they're very easy to feel with your fingers. I go in there with my fingers and a pair of forceps and with some really good medication to kill the pain. And I get the tooth to come out. And that's pretty easy. I haven't had a tooth yet, unless they haven't fractured off yet. They haven't fractured off, I just let them mature. And that's always works. Sometimes it takes a year or two. But once they mature and they're ready to come out, the horse doesn't have any pain there. I'll take them out. They usually don't go into the sinus. Some of these infections can go up in the sinus. And what everybody wants to do is pull the whole tooth out. And that I can understand that. What you've done is you basically lanced the abscess and allowed all the pus to drain out into the horse's mouth instead of out of its nostrils. But the infection finally goes away. Many of these teeth are diseased. Some of these teeth aren't diseased at all, but they have infection going down the side of the tooth. And then you now have a hole in the mouth. You also have a space. Hold on just a second. I got to do something here. That's the way I have to close and open my door every once in a while to get the charge to keep coming into the car. Otherwise, it shuts down. Anyway, the tooth is out, and now you possibly have a hole that can go up into the sinus. people in the profession will admit that there's a 50 to 70% complication rate with all tooth extractions in horses. And I always think that pulling a tooth is something that you want to do as last resort, because I've seen so many go bad. But they are starting to get better at tooth extractions, but I just wonder how necessary all of them are. I've seen horses that have had fractured teeth that are impossible to get out. They're broken in 3 or 4 different places. And we've tried antibiotics, we've tried sinus flushing, and then we just turn the horse out in the field because the horse is a Belgian, and Belgians and anesthesia don't work very well. And this horse was absolutely, didn't do well with any painkillers. I was so sensitive. And about a year later, we took a look at the horse and the nasal discharge had cleared up. And it's been probably 5 or 6 years since we did that, maybe longer. And the horse has never had a problem, still has a fractured teeth, but the horse is able to granulate in and deal with it. And it's never been a problem. And I still see the horse once a year and file down the teeth, and it's doing just fine. So there's no controlled studies, no double-blind, placebo-controlled large cohort of these teeth extractions to see just how effective and how necessary it is. But the biggest question I've got is, why do we see so many fractured teeth? When I was in vet school in the 80s, there was nothing in the textbooks about fractured teeth. They would talk about sinus infections, about making a hole in the sinus and then taking a punch and with a hammer punching the tooth out into the mouth. Pretty barbaric way to take a tooth out. There are complications with that as well. And now people extract them through the mouth through using spreaders and rocking back and forth, but hard to do when the tooth is already fractured. But that's what they do now. They're taking these teeth out, but nobody's asking the question, why are we having this? Where did it come from? Is this a new disease? And you don't need any fancy diagnostic radiographs to know that a tooth has fractured and that a piece is flipped out and digging into the horse's cheek. I mean, if this is something that happened all the time, we would have seen records of it in the 1800s textbooks, but it's not there. Or if it is, it's just rare. Now it seems like everybody seems to have these fractured cheek teeth. I was doing at least one a week. And the question still remains, what's causing it? And then I found out that in 1932, some dentists were doing some studies to determine why children were getting dental caries in Brooklyn. And their conclusion was it was caused by them eating oatmeal. And they took the oatmeal away. Oatmeal is nothing but oats, grain, and a lot of people feed grains to horses. But anyway, these the dental caries in these children went away. So why is that? Well, it turns out there's 700 to 1,200 different individual species of bacteria that live inside the healthy mouth of horse and man. It depends on who you read. We'll stick with 700. I think Texas A&M did their study where they looked at the microbiome of the mouth. Because remember, the mouth, the oral cavity is the beginning part of your digestive tract, and it's technically outside your body. Obviously, you're putting things from outside through that hole, and it's definitely dirty. And the bacteria in there are supposed to keep your mouth healthy. And when you upset that microbiota, Texas A&M found that one dose of Previcox or Equiox would actually wipe out a whole family of bacteria in the mouth. Well, my contention is because we're feeding so much sugar to our horses in the form of grains and the form of hay 24 hours, 365 days a year, that the sugar is causing a disruption of the microbiota, which is causing the decay of the teeth. Now, I remember in 2002, I flew over to Glasgow, Scotland, to go to the British Equine Veterinary Association's meeting. And I was able to sit down with Dr. Patty Dixon, who's pretty much the most accomplished researcher in dentistry in horses and teeth of horses. And he said to me that, he asked everybody, what's causing these fractures? And nobody had an answer. But I found it interesting that going back to the way the tongue wears the teeth, in horses that are at least 5 years old and older, certainly the older they get, I find a groove is called, I call it a swale, but a groove or a swale is made. A swale is those ditches alongside the road. It's just, instead of being flat and even, it goes across and then there's a dip and it comes back up. And that's clearly mid-arcade of the lower cheek teeth in the mandible. And then if you look at the upper jaw, you're going to see a swale that goes vertically on the upper outside of the teeth. And my hypothesis is the tongue comes over at that point and wears across the lower teeth and then sweeps up to clean the upper jaw. I just did it with my tongue. I'm sure you guys are doing it. Just take your tongue and clean the upper arcade of your teeth between your teeth and your cheek. And you can see the tongue is constantly going across there and wearing down these edges. And that's what I call a swale, both on lower and upper. It makes it floating the area difficult with a very inflexible steel blade. But you have to go back in, pitch the blade down and go back in and then pitch it up and get out the other side to get all those teeth routed up beautifully. But that's, again, the tongue movement. And the more movement of the tongue, the more these swales occur. But it goes over the fourth cheek tooth. And it's always the fourth cheek tooth that seems to be affected more than any other tooth in the mouth as far as decay goes. I call it central necrosis. They can call decay of the pulp chambers that are coalescing. I don't think anybody's got a name for it. I just call it central necrosis. It's just necrotic. The tooth just starts to fall apart, and then the food material gets in there and it wedges the tooth to a point where it splits open, just like a wedge going into a log for firewood. So cleaning the mouth, I think, and getting the tongue to clean this area out is important. Also, if you all know me, I'm an anti-grain fan. I don't think grain belongs in a horse's mouth. And I think it would be great to take some horses that have never had grain to see if they ever have any dental caries. That would be an interesting study. Again, nobody's got the money to do that and to fund that. It'll all have to be anecdotal. Also on grain, my hypothesis is it also causes an autoimmune disease of the bones that the incisors lay in. And that autoimmune disease causes the bone to become unhealthy. And subsequently, the incisors become inflamed and loose, and the gum recedes, and the teeth fall out. And they call it equine odontoclastic tooth resorption, equine odontoclastic tooth resorption, and hypercementosis. And everyone's calling it EOTRH. Yeah, somebody had a different name. They combined the words, and eoth or eotor or something. Anyway, it's EOTRH. And that wasn't in the textbooks in the 1980s. And again, you don't need anything other than to lift the lips to see it. I was calling it ugly teeth of old horses for the longest time, to someone who's pretty smart looked at it and said, no, it's the bones underneath that are causing the problem. So if I get these horses off grain, that seems to really help these horses from getting to accelerate any further. That's probably caused by lectins, and lectins are the plant proteins in the seeds, in the wheat middlings and the oat hulls and the soybean hulls and all the other hulls that they throw into your horse feeds because they have no other place to put it and they sell it to you. I think that it's the lectins that are causing it. And it's been proven in humans that mushrooms will actually bind to lectins and help extract them out of the gut before they cause leaky gut syndrome. And that's why shredded mushrooms have been effective by adding that to the feed. They're binding to the lectins, and it certainly has decreased the inflammation of the EOTRH in horses. Shredded mushrooms can do that. There's a product out there that is made specifically for EOTRH, which is shredded mushrooms. Okay, what else can I tell you about teeth? Okay, I've been told that I need to examine the mouth for periodontal disease. And this it gets me, because periodontal disease is what fancy name for gum disease. And horses get gum disease. I've seen it all the time. I can feel it with my fingers. I can smell it when my fingers come out. It's instead of being a healthy gum, it's kind of mushy. It may or may not be painful. And I find that a couple of things can cause this. Number one, for me, the biggest thing is a remnant of a tooth from a baby tooth that came out, and the remnant just is never cleared out. And we call them cap remnants. And these are small, very tiny pieces of tooth that are lodged between the gum and the tooth, much like a kernel of popcorn gets stuck in between there, or anything else you might have stuck between your gum and your tooth. And it's very hard to get out. But I find that these things will actually heal up if you can find that chunk of tooth and take it out. And again, I do that again with my fingers. I can feel it. I can pull it out. Another thing that causes periodontal disease is, again, a disrupted microbiome. And again, maybe we just weren't looking for it, but I didn't hear anything about periodontal disease in horses. But they're now recognizing in humans that periodontal disease is a disruption of the microbiome in the mouth of the humans. So I look at the diet and I get the horses off the diet and I say, look, forage only, don't do that. Second, I take away all the sharp edges, so now the tongue can get in there and clean it. And with the help of the antibodies that are distributed by the saliva and the cleaning action of the tongue, I'll come back in 6 months and most periodontal diseases will have resolved all on their own. But again, nobody's looking at the cause of periodontal disease, just like they aren't looking for the cause of cheek tooth fractures. So once we get the cause and we can prevent this from happening, I guess all these fancy dental applications that are coming out are going to be for moot because you're not going to need it anymore. What we do need, though, is continuous filing of the teeth. And the biggest reason we file the teeth is because they keep chewing. And every time they chew, they wear down a little bit more tooth, and then they lick the edge with their tongue, and it sharpens a little bit more. And I found it interesting, back in 2002, Dr. Dixon and I were having lunch together, it's just him and me. And he asked me what I thought about incisor reductions. And I said, well, I think that they're a waste of time. I think the problem is coming from the back teeth, and take care of the back teeth and the pain and the altered movement of the teeth, and you will have incisors that'll be just fine. And he said back in 2002 that was interesting because they were doing electron microscopy of the teeth and found that the enamel of the incisors was softer than the enamel of the cheek teeth. And he called it type 1 and type 2. I don't know which one goes to which. But I've extrapolated one more degree when they said that they found that there are 3 types of enamel. They call it type 1, 2, and 3. I call it soft, hard, and brittle. I may be way off base on this, but again, my experience is I find some horses that have rock hard teeth, that if you don't have really sharp blades, you're not cutting through them. Then you have really soft teeth where no effort at all is done and they're done. And then you come back 3 months later and they're sharp as if they've never been floated. This is common in horses that are 5 years of age or younger. And between 5 and 10, I find that the enamel goes from soft to hard. And then there's brittle, where the teeth chip. They just are constantly chipping. Wherever they chip, they make a razor sharp edge. And it's like a corrugated mouth that just is razor sharp. And these horses are always so appreciative going in there and finding these chips that are still attached to the gum and pulling them out, or filing down the sharp edges and making them nice and smooth. So Dr. Dixon was saying that they found that the incisors have softer enamel than the cheek teeth. And he was agreeing. He said in the United Kingdom, they're rapidly moving away from incisor reductions because they realized that it's all secondary to the back teeth. And that was in 2002. And then Dr. Lauder from University of Georgia at the AAP conference, where they had a special wet lab on dentistry, he also said from where he was speaking to us, he said that they're rapidly moving away from incisor reductions. I thought it was kind of interesting that both these gentlemen from half a world apart used the words rapidly moving away. So I think maybe they've been talking to each other. But I don't think anybody does incisor reductions unless they're of the belief that it's important. But again, stress that there's no science behind it. And of the 75,000 horses that I've done, I've not done incisor reduction and yet gotten results back that are improvement in the way the horse moves on the bit, or improves on the horse that couldn't chew before is chewing just fine after I got done. I've never seen the front teeth cause a problem in horses other than EOTRH. So I think I'm covering most of the myths, most of the misconceptions. I probably have a dozen more things in my mind that if we had more time, I could really get into and start looking at a little bit harder. But right now, I think that's just about all I've got in this brain. The sun's going down. My car is almost charged. And I just want to say thank you for being part of this. Thank you for all my clients who have used me since 1983, who have allowed me to experiment for the first 30 years. And now I'm honed my skills a little bit. And it's a shout out to anybody who's a veterinarian who really cares about taking care of their horses and offering the best dental care. If you're invested in your power tools and you're automatically sedating the horse and using a mouth speculum, and you think that that's great, that's fine, but you're missing a whole bunch of people who don't want this. And if you wanted to learn how to do this and offer both ways to horse owners, I think you're offering a better service. So when you do find something, you can say, okay, I found something here. I really want to medicate and inspect this using a odontoscope, which is basically a fiber optic scope that goes in the mouth. Or you want to do radiographs, you can still do that. But if it's just a routine float, what I have found in routine floating are several things. One, the mouth overall becomes healthier. Endodontic disease, the periodontal disease, the gum disease goes away just by floating the teeth almost every time, unless there's a nidus in there that's causing a problem. Two, the horse is extremely happy. Three, after floating the teeth maybe 2 years, 4 times every 6 months, somewhere between 2 and 3 years, it becomes routine. It's what I call it, they fall into the groove, which is kind of interesting. And I'll never forget when Melissa started working, she would stick her hand in the side of the mouth of horses that I've been doing for several years. And she turned to me and she said, "You've been doing this horse for a while, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" She says, "Because they're all straight. It's almost like the horse has been wearing braces and they've aligned the teeth." And it's really true. The teeth will actually move in the mouth, no different than putting a set of braces on orthodontics on children. You can move their mouth, move their teeth in their jaw and reposition them. And I find that once the tongue is free to move and the jaw is free to move without pain, the teeth actually line up. And again, there's no scientific studies, but once you feel the inside of a mouth that's been taken care of on a routine basis, they will line up straight. It's just amazing. Not all crooked teeth will become straight, but you can feel it, you can palpate, and it's obvious when that happens. So that's kind of interesting. Another one is when they're 60 years old, listen to me, 30 years old, and they haven't had any dental care. And then they come to me and say, "Doc, I need you to fix this horse because he can't chew." And I stick my hand in there and it's a disaster. And then I start rubbing the file over it. The teeth actually wiggle, they vibrate because the tooth is no longer healthy and being held in the socket with all the ligaments it needs, because there's something called disuse atrophy, which means the tongue isn't going over and pushing up against the tooth and causing the tooth to push back with its holdings, its roots, if you will, to its connections to the jaw. And so the tooth starts to wiggle and gets loose. So I'll lightly float these guys and I'll say, "I'll come back in 2 to 3 months and we'll do some more." And when I come back in 2 to 3 months, the teeth are now solid in the socket. They don't rattle anymore. They don't wiggle. The horse is so much happier. The stale smell, and that's interesting because I recognize 5 different smells inside a horse's mouth. But one of them is called stale. And that I find in some older horses that just don't want to move their tongue, so they're not cleaning their mouth. And once I get rid of these sharp points and the tongue can start moving around the mouth, that stale smell goes away, which I find is fascinating. So in these older horses that haven't had dental care, floating the teeth can firm up the sockets and get rid of the bad smells. And that, to me, is an indication that the mouth is healthier. So I know you got probably a dozen more questions here, and I got things popping up in my mind. We're coming up on 50 minutes here. And I want to try to make sure I've covered everything that's going to be of interest to you in thinking about dentistry, things that you never think about in horses. If you're barrel racing and you're in thousandths of a second, if the horse is throwing his head up in the air and is breaking his stride because of that, dentistry certainly is an option. If you're a dressage rider and you've got your head carriage that's the horse is fighting, it's twisting its head, you want to make sure that, especially if you got a double bridle in there, 2 bits in there, more mass, you want to make sure that the teeth are rounded up beautifully. That's something that's I'm kind of quote unquote famous for, is my expression called flabby cheeks. And I came up with that expression just because I came up with it and I thought, all the women would remember it, flabby cheeks. And it actually has nothing to do with cheeks, but it gets you thinking about being inside the mouth of the horse. And about half the horses I see out there have this excessive amount of fat tissue that lays on the bars right where the bit goes. So the bars are on the lower jaw between the very first cheek tooth and the incisors, with or without a canine. If you're a male horse, canines are only in male horses, not in females, as a rule. And then this fat layer is like if you were just looking at the floor and you threw a blanket on it. That blanket is kind of covering the floor. That's what this mass of fat looks like. It can be small, it can be large. And as the bit comes back, it'll pull that mass of fat back up against the first cheek tooth. And the first cheek tooth is pointed like the shape of the bow of the Titanic, a very sharp pointed tooth. And my goal is to round that into what looks like the bow of a tugboat. So it's not pointed at all. So when the bit comes back and moves that mass of fat, it's going to find a place to escape to. It's not going to be pinched. Now, half the horses have this, and of those, half of them could care less. They're like, okay, go ahead and round it up. I don't care, doc. But the other half, which is 25% of all horses, and that's just my rough estimate. I've never counted it, but it feels like 25%, will have some sort of sensitivity there. So as you get in there to try and round that tooth off and make it look like the bow of a tugboat, they'll put up a little bit of a fuss. They're standing, they'll do floating all day, but you get to that first bottom cheek tooth and you start to round it up, and they're really saying, hey, doc, go easy. That I'm really being bothered by that. And then there's a certain section of them, maybe 10% of them, that I can't even float that tooth without medicating them. They are absolutely adamant about, you don't touch that or I will kill you. And after you medicate them, then you can round it. And what's really nice is they go so much better in the bit. And then they also seem to appreciate me coming back. And every time we come back, they want to remind me, hey, doc, remember, that tooth bothers me. And I say, yes. And I use a couple of different techniques that we use to get in there and kind of round it off. And after a while, we can sometimes do it without drugs. There's other horses that are just so petrified, they just have to drug them just to get there. Fine for the rest of the mouth. But the first bottom cheek teeth are sensitive. And I usually turn to the woman, or to the rider, I should say, and say, you got pretty good hands, don't you? This horse is pretty sensitive. They said, oh my gosh, you have no idea. I can't put any students on this horse. It's got to be special riders. I won't let anybody else ride this horse, etc. Or I get this, oh, I don't even put a bit in their mouth. They're so sensitive. And that's where this bit thing comes. They're just really sensitive, that first bottom cheek teeth. So if you're into bit fitting, I've got I've got a couple of bit fitters who now know about flabby cheeks, and they look for it. And before they do any more bit fitting, they make sure that the first bottom cheek teeth are rounded up. So now we have a horse that's in good shape before you put a bit in. Flabby cheeks. I've got so much more. I guess I could go on and on. I think I'm going to save everything. I'm going to do this as a rounds, I think in December. You have to be a member to see the rounds where we all get together as a Zoom and you can ask a bunch of questions where I'll really dig in and try to get more and more of this information out there. But just off the top of my head, as I'm sitting here, just after my 75,000th float, I thought you guys might want to hear a couple things that I do with horses' teeth. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, that's great. Please remember to leave a review someplace, hopefully a 5-star rating. And if you don't think it's a 5-star rating, tell me why and how I can improve it, because that's the only thing I can do is improve these things. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's a whole different bunch of personalities. One I listen to, I actually like, where they drop words that I won't use on a family program all the time. And then I have others that are so boring and you just want to, like, can you move on? Some that I just listen to over and over again to get all the nuances out of it. So just let me know what I'm doing and see if I can do some, make something better, and tell me if there's something you'd like me to talk about. But that's about it. Please become a member of the Horses Advocate. I think becoming a member just brings us closer together. You're not just this massive people in some sort of social media group, but you're actually somebody who's part of something big, and that you can help other people learn how to become their horses advocate and help horses thrive in a human world. So I appreciate your time here, and I look forward to having some more time with you in the future. Thanks, Doc T out. Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's 2 reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.